What if everything you were taught about human origins is wrong? What if the gods of ancient myth were not divine beings, but scientists from another world? And what if we weren't created in a garden, but in a laboratory? Hidden in the dust of ancient Mesopotamia lies the truth, the 14 Tablets of Enki. These shattered clay tablets tell a story so explosive it was buried for millennia. A story of how an advanced alien race came to Earth, needed workers, and genetically engineered a new species to serve them. That species is us. This isn't mythology. This is a warning, a history, and a prophecy etched in stone by a being who knew we would one day be ready to hear it. In the shadows of forgotten history, beneath the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, lies a mystery so profound it challenges everything we thought we knew about human civilization. Hidden in the fragmented clay of long-lost tablets, a voice whispers across millennia. It is the voice of Enki, a Sumerian god, or perhaps something far more extraordinary. This is the forbidden history of the Anunnaki, and the revelations contained within the 14 Tablets of Enki. A narrative buried in time, long dismissed by scholars, yet alive in the echoes of ancient myths. Tonight, we embark on a journey across 445,000 years of terrestrial history, a story of gods, men, rebellion, power, and secrets too dangerous to be embraced by mainstream history. The tablets were discovered in the ruins of the ancient cities of Nippur, Eridu, and Ur, civilizations older than Babylon, older even than Egypt. Written in cuneiform on baked clay, these texts are attributed to Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom, water, and creation. But who or what was Enki really? To understand the gravity of the 14 tablets, we must first confront a disturbing possibility that the gods of the ancient world were not gods at all, but advanced extraterrestrial beings. Known collectively as the Anunnaki, these entities are described as descending from the heavens to shape Earth and its destiny. The tablets begin with a tale that stretches beyond Earth's own history, a planet named Nibiru, a dying world whose inhabitants sought survival through conquest, technology, and genetics. Enki, a chief scientist among the Anunnaki, was dispatched to Earth not as a conqueror, but as a builder. According to the first tablet, Enki arrives on a young, raw Earth to mine for gold that could save Nibiru's atmosphere. But Earth was no paradise. It was wild, dangerous, and unknown. Enki and his team, among them his half-brother Enlil, and a medical officer named Nin-Hursag, begin the task of transforming this alien planet into a base of operations. Tablet after tablet reveals startling details of how the Anunnaki toiled to extract gold from Earth's crust, of how rebellion brewed among their ranks, and of the unthinkable solution Enki devised, the creation of a new being to take on the burden of labor, a being that would become us. Through genetic manipulation, combining Anunnaki DNA with that of Earth's primitive hominids, Enki created Adamu and Tiamat, the first Homo sapiens, not born but engineered. This wasn't divine creation, it was intelligent design in a laboratory. But Enki's act was not without controversy. His half-brother Enlil, a commander with a stern sense of order, saw the new humans as a threat, disposable. Enlil demanded obedience, Enki nurtured curiosity, and in that ideological rift, a timeless struggle was born. In Tablet 4, the tension escalates. As the humans multiply and grow more capable, Enlil orders a great cleansing, a deliberate flood to wipe the slate clean. But Enki, moved by his creation, warns a chosen human, Ziusudra, or as some traditions know him, Noah. The Great Deluge, long considered myth, may have roots in truth. The Tablets of Enki describe the flood not as divine punishment, but as a calculated act of genocide, narrowly thwarted by a scientist with a conscience. And yet, the flood was only the beginning. In the later tablets, Enki outlines the re-establishment of civilization, the rise of new cities, and the seeding of knowledge among humanity, mathematics, astronomy, writing, agriculture, all gifts from the Anunnaki. But were these gifts truly benevolent, or part of a larger plan to control and monitor a species of their own creation? Tablet 10 hints at secret genetic experiments, beings with unusual traits, hybrid creatures, and even attempts to manipulate human lifespan. The story begins to turn darker. The later tablets speak of wars among the Anunnaki themselves. Factions split, cities destroyed by advanced weaponry, descriptions that eerily resemble nuclear devastation. By Tablet 13, a somber Enki reflects on what has been wrought, the manipulation of life, the betrayal of kin, the unintended consequences of tampering with evolution. He writes not as a god, but as a remorseful father figure, torn between duty to his own people and love for the beings he helped create. And then, silence. Tablet 14, the final entry, ends abruptly, as if the story was never meant to be finished or was forcibly cut short. What happened to Enki? What became of the Anunnaki? Were they wiped out, or did they simply leave? And if they left, will they one day return? The 14 tablets of Enki offer more than history. They are a warning, and perhaps a mirror. In their story, we glimpse our own, a tale of ambition, hubris, compassion, and the eternal thirst for knowledge. This is not just the forgotten past. It is the forbidden history of humanity, a history etched in clay, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood. The aftermath of the flood marked a turning point not only for humanity, but also for the Anunnaki themselves. With much of Earth reshaped and the old cities submerged or in ruins, a new plan had to be drawn. Enki and those who still stood by his side sought to rebuild, but this time with more caution. They had witnessed firsthand the dangers of power unchecked and the consequences of playing God. From the ashes, new cities were laid out: Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, places that would one day echo through the myths and scriptures of countless future civilizations. Humans, now possessing more intelligence than ever before, were no longer mere workers. They had begun to ask questions, to build temples, to worship. The Anunnaki were no longer just engineers and overseers. They became deities in the eyes of the people. And yet, beneath this divine facade, tensions among the Anunnaki continued to simmer. Enlil, ever wary of humanity's potential, enforced a doctrine of obedience and control. Meanwhile, Enki, quietly and strategically, continued to pass down knowledge. Tablet 5 reveals the story of kingship, not as a human invention, but as a divine mandate. The Anunnaki, recognizing the need for order, installed rulers from among their own bloodlines or trusted human proxies. These kings were taught not just governance, but the secrets of energy, architecture, even celestial navigation. But with knowledge came rivalry. Among the Anunnaki themselves, disputes over territory, ideology, and authority escalated. The Earth, once a cooperative outpost for their mission, had become a fractured land of competing city-states, each backed by different factions of these so-called gods. One of the more mysterious revelations from Tablet 6 involves what Enki calls the Watchers. These were beings assigned to monitor human progress, to ensure that their development followed the intended path. But the Watchers, much like the rest, began to falter. Some grew attached to humans, even mated with them, producing offspring that were neither fully Anunnaki nor fully human. Giants, heroes, demigods, they filled the early epics and would later become the source of stories like the Nephilim. As these hybrids multiplied, the world changed once more. The pure bloodlines of the Anunnaki saw this as an existential threat. Enlil called again for purification, but Enki, ever the rebel, defended the hybrids, seeing in them a bridge between two worlds. He believed that these beings could usher in a new era, one where humans and Anunnaki might coexist as equals. That belief would cost him dearly. In Tablet 7, we read about a terrible weapon, one that could level cities and leave the soil barren for generations. It was called the Weapon of Terror, and it had only been used once before in the earliest wars of Nibiru. Enlil, driven by desperation and perhaps envy, authorized its use against a rival Anunnaki faction based in the cities of Sumer. What followed was not just the destruction of cities like Sodom and Gomorrah, but the scattering of people, languages, and knowledge across the globe. This cataclysm may well have been the spark behind the legends of Babel, of divine wrath, and the fragmentation of mankind. Enki, watching all this unfold, did not remain silent. Tablet 8 is his lament. He speaks of love lost, of creations twisted, and of a dream that began in hope but descended into control and conquest. He writes of his regrets and his desire to preserve what little purity remained. In the shadows, he began to safeguard select humans, teaching them in secret, storing knowledge in hidden libraries, crystal tablets, and underground vaults. His goal was no longer domination. It was survival, not of the Anunnaki, but of truth itself. Tablet 9 takes on a more philosophical tone. Enki contemplates the nature of life, death, and the soul. He questions whether beings such as themselves, creators of life through technology, possess true divinity, or whether divinity lies in something deeper, more mysterious, and perhaps beyond their reach. He wonders if their tampering with the natural order has awakened a force they cannot control. Whispers of karma, of spiritual consequence, begin to color his writing. It is here we find the first mention of what he calls the awakening. A time far in the future when humanity would begin to question their origins and rediscover the truths hidden in myth. The narrative of these tablets does not end with resolution. Instead, Tablet 10 picks up on the fragmentation of the Anunnaki presence on Earth. Some chose to depart, returning to Nibiru or disappearing into the stars. Others stayed behind, embedding themselves more deeply into human culture and myth. They became the pantheons of Egypt, Greece, India, and the Americas. Their names changed, but the stories remained. Gods of thunder, wisdom, war, and fertility, each echoing back to the original beings who walked the earth long before us. As the final 4 tablets unfold, we begin to see Enki's deeper purpose. He was not merely a scientist or rebel, he was a guardian of memory. His writings, scattered and hidden, were his last defense against oblivion. He foresaw a time when the world would forget, when humanity would be enslaved not by whips and chains, but by ignorance. And so he encoded knowledge in symbols, in stories, and in the very structure of ancient myths, waiting for the day when we might be ready to see. The deeper we move into the last portions of Enki's tablets, the more complex and unsettling the revelations become. Tablet 11 opens with an intriguing account of how humanity, following the dispersal and downfall of the first great cities, began forming independent civilizations scattered across the globe. According to Enki, these were not spontaneous eruptions of progress, but carefully planned acts. He and his loyalists had seeded colonies across different continents: Africa, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica. Each outpost carried fragments of ancient knowledge, encoded into ritual, architecture, and myth. The goal was not empire, but preservation. Enki knew that the past could not be rewritten, but its memory could be preserved through symbol. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the megalithic alignments found across the earth, they were more than monuments. They were messages, warnings, coordinates. Some were even aligned to star systems tied to the Anunnaki's origins. Enki believed that by embedding these truths into the very stone, they would endure even when the tablets did not. Tablet 12 marks a notable shift in tone. No longer recounting events from the past, Enki turns to prophecy. He speaks of a time when the stars would again align, when Nibiru would return. He warns that humanity will face a choice: to awaken or to forget forever. He describes a world dominated by false knowledge, where technology eclipses wisdom, and where the manipulation of biology, just as the Anunnaki once practiced, would become humanity's own undoing. He warns of a cycle. What once was done to humanity, humanity will one day do to itself. He also speaks of watchers still among us. Not the original Anunnaki, but remnants, either descendants or constructs, left behind to ensure the unfolding of events. These watchers operate in secret. influencing global systems from behind veils of power, finance, and culture. If Enki is to be believed, the gods never truly left. They merely changed form. In Tablet 13, Enki becomes deeply introspective. He speaks directly to the humans of the distant future. He pleads for us to seek unity, not domination, to rediscover the connection between the cosmos and the soul. He shares that his greatest mistake was underestimating the impact of free will. Once consciousness was awakened in humans, it could not be reversed. The path to enlightenment, or ruin, would be entirely up to us. This tablet includes descriptions of hidden chambers beneath ancient cities, vaults sealed with vibrational keys, and repositories of knowledge that can only be opened by those who carry a certain frequency of thought. Whether metaphor or technology, the implication is clear. Enki left behind more than tablets. He left triggers, beacons, waiting for those ready to activate them. The final tablet, Tablet 14, is barely intact. Fragmented, charred, and worn, its surviving lines are cryptic. Yet from what remains, one phrase stands out. The seed of the future lies buried in the past. Enki, in his closing words, seems to acknowledge the end of his own time on Earth. There is sadness in his writing, but also hope. He entrusts humanity with the responsibility of self-discovery, of remembering not just their origin, but their purpose. And with that, the voice of Enki fades, not into oblivion, but into legacy. Whether one sees the Anunnaki as literal beings, metaphorical gods, or ancient ancestors shrouded in myth, the message endures. We are not merely creatures of the earth. We are inheritors of a cosmic drama, participants in a story far older than we ever imagined. As the dust of ancient time continues to settle, a haunting question begins to echo louder through the fragments of Enki's legacy. Why were the final tablets hidden, scattered, or perhaps deliberately obscured? If these writings were so critical, so dense with cosmic significance, why were they not better preserved? The answer, Enki implies subtly in his final inscriptions, lies not in oversight, but in fear. Not his fear, but that of those who remained after him. Though Tablet 14 marked the end of Enki's formal record, clues buried within the preceding texts point to a postscript, a suppressed epilogue carried not in cuneiform, but in oral tradition, esoteric teachings, and encoded myths passed down through generations. The gods may have left, but their influence endured, diffused like starlight across cultures, continents, and time. We see it in the Serpent of Eden, often demonized, but once revered as the bringer of knowledge, Enki's ancient symbol. We see it in the bloodlines of kings, priests, and sages who claimed divine ancestry, not as metaphor, but as historical truth. We see it in secret societies, from the Magi to the Freemasons, guarding rituals and symbols whose origins predate written history. Were these echoes deliberate? Were these echoes instructions? The Tablets of Enki do not merely tell of humanity's engineered origins. They hint at a deeper, more uncomfortable truth, that human destiny itself was engineered. Enki's creation of Homo sapiens was not the end of his work. It was the beginning of a living experiment, one with branches and variations. Evidence scattered across the later tablets suggests that the Anunnaki did not stop at a single prototype. There were others. Failed hybrids, mutations, subspecies with enhanced abilities or limited lifespans, each crafted for different purposes: warfare, agriculture, servitude, exploration. Some of these beings, Enki writes with a mixture of pride and sorrow, were too much like us. They became self-aware, they asked questions, and those were the ones Enlil most feared. In a chilling passage from the middle of Tablet 11, Enki describes a purging event that occurred in a forgotten age, a culling of beings whose cognitive and emotional faculties rivaled that of their makers. These were not myths. These were lives, wiped clean from history, erased by fire and flood. What remains of them today? Whispers in the myths of giants, titans, demigods, and perhaps the subtle anomalies in our own DNA. And this leads to one of the most startling revelations buried in the heart of the Enki tablets: the role of memory, not cultural memory, not historical record, but biological memory, what some might call genetic memory. Enki hints at programming embedded into the very genome of early humans, sleepers waiting to awaken, instructions locked in double helixes, waiting for activation under certain environmental, astronomical, or psychic conditions. Could this be the true meaning behind his phrase, "The seed of the future lies buried in the past"? Not just metaphorical, but literal. As we reach deeper into the subtext of Tablet 12, the idea of the return becomes more pronounced. Enki speaks of a time when the sky gods shall be visible again, when Nibiru, the wandering planet, will swing close enough to Earth to be seen with the naked eye. He warns that the signs will be misunderstood: climate chaos, magnetic anomalies, societal fragmentation, and above all, an existential confusion among humanity, a forgetting of purpose, a falling asleep of the soul. But Enki also leaves hope. He speaks of a resonance frequency that can awaken the dormant codes within certain bloodlines. Those descended not just from the Anunnaki, but from a very specific pairing, those he created with intention, not utility. These humans, he says, were not made for labor or obedience, but for guardianship. The children of balance, he calls them, those who carry both the fire of the gods and the humility of the earth. If awakened, they will lead. If suppressed, they will suffer. This may sound like mysticism, yet in the quiet halls of modern genetics, we now find evidence that supports what Enki may have been trying to explain in ancient terms. Junk DNA, once thought to be meaningless, now appears to play roles in regulation, consciousness, even memory formation. Epigenetics shows us that trauma, knowledge, and even intuition can be passed across generations. What if the ancients knew this? What if they used it? Tablet 13 becomes a kind of philosophical treatise. Enki no longer describes events, he reflects, he speculates, he pleads. It is as if he knows his words may be found thousands of years after his departure, and he writes not to his contemporaries, but to us. He speaks of the soul, of a mysterious element the Anunnaki could not create or destroy, only observe. He admits, humbly, that though they manipulated flesh, engineered intelligence, even prolonged life, they could not touch the soul, and it was this soul, he believed, that made humans unique. Not a flaw, not an error, a mystery even the gods could not solve. In his final writings, Enki seems almost wistful. He warns that knowledge without soul leads to ruin, that control without compassion leads to rebellion. He even questions whether the Anunnaki, in all their power, were ever truly evolved, or merely clever, and it is here that the forbidden history sharpens into its most dangerous point. What if humanity was not a failed experiment, but the next phase? What if we are not merely the creations of the gods, but their successors? The tablets imply that Enki saw what others did not, the potential of human evolution, not just physically, but spiritually. In us, he saw a capacity for self-awareness that exceeded that of his own people, and for that, he was cast out, silenced, or perhaps willingly stepped away. The final broken lines of Tablet 14 offer no definitive answer, only a mystery, a riddle passed down in symbols, sacred sites, and mythologies. But the message is unmistakable. The story is not over. It was never meant to be. It is waiting. If the 14 tablets of Enki were ever meant to reach us, it's not simply because they held stories of the past. It's because they whispered truths too dangerous or too transformative for their time, perhaps even for ours. And yet, they persist. Not through mainstream education, not in temples or official histories, but through persistent myth, shared intuition, and the strange, unshakable feeling that we are more than we've been told. The next logical question, then, is this. If Enki foresaw our eventual awakening, did he also foresee resistance? Did he anticipate that others, be they his Anunnaki kin or their human proxies, would work to keep us asleep? The tone of Tablet 13 suggests he did. In fact, he outlines a coming era, a dark age, not in the absence of knowledge, but in the explosion of it, a time when humanity would be so bombarded by data, opinion, doctrine, and noise that the simple truth would be drowned. He called it the Age of Confusion. In this time, he warned, false gods would rise, not from the heavens, but from among men. Institutions would claim divine favor, leaders would rewrite history, truth would become a commodity, technology would advance, but inner wisdom would decay. He described it with unsettling accuracy, an age where people would believe they were free, yet be more controlled than ever, not by chains, not by weapons, but by ideas carefully engineered to divide. Yet even in this bleak forecast, Enki offered light. He believed that a great unraveling would trigger a greater remembering, that systems built on illusion would eventually collapse under their own weight, and when they did, the ancient truths would re-emerge, not through force, but through resonance, through the rediscovery of forgotten languages, symbols, and alignments that would reactivate memory, not just of the mind, but of the soul. It's here, in the depths of Tablet 12 and its remnants, that Enki introduces the concept of soul codes. These were not genetic traits, but energetic imprints, frequencies of awareness that could lie dormant for centuries, until catalyzed by specific experiences: love, loss, synchronicity, trauma, revelation. These codes were not just passive data, they were potential, carriers of forgotten missions, buried knowledge, and even ancestral memory. It was Enki's hope, or perhaps his gamble, that certain individuals across time would awaken these codes when the world needed them most. They wouldn't need to read the tablets to understand their message. They would simply remember. They would feel it in their bones, they would know it in their dreams, and they would not be alone. Because just as he seeded this knowledge within humanity, he also alluded to the existence of the others, fellow travelers, watchers, and guides hidden in plain sight. These weren't just remnants of the Anunnaki. Some were humans, lineages protected through millennia, often ridiculed, hunted, or dismissed as mystics, shamans, or madmen. Others may have been something else entirely. Tablet 12 goes further, hinting at structures beneath the earth, repositories of what he called the deep memory. He described vaults encoded with harmonic frequencies, accessible only when the resonance of a human matched the ancient code. Whether literal or metaphorical, this idea repeats across cultures: the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx, the Tibetan cave libraries, the hidden chambers of the Andes and Himalayas, places spoken of, but rarely seen, always guarded, always sacred. Some researchers believe these stories are symbolic, representing the inward journey of enlightenment. But what if they are both? What if inner and outer discovery mirror each other? What if, as Enki suggests, the path to the stars passes first through the self? In Tablet 13, Enki gives one of his most stirring calls to humanity. He pleads with us to reclaim the forgotten balance between mind and spirit, science and myth, logic and intuition. He acknowledges that the Anunnaki, for all their knowledge, lost something essential. In chasing control, they lost wonder. In mastering life, they forgot how to live. He believed that humans, in their raw, chaotic beauty, could recover that balance and become more than their creators ever were. But only if we choose to remember. The idea of remembering, true remembering, becomes a kind of mantra in Enki's closing words. Not the remembering of facts or even history, but the remembering of origin, of connection, of the sacred. He writes that no external structure, no temple, no book, no tablet can ever replace the inner temple of a conscious human being. And then, silence. As we approach the final fractured lines of Tablet 14, the tone shifts from revelation to farewell. It is as if Enki knew his time on Earth was over, or at least that his voice would soon be silenced. He doesn't speak of returning physically. Instead, he speaks of his echo living on in those who listen, not with their ears, but with their hearts. The last complete line we have reads, "Let those who carry the spark seek one another, for in their unity shall the path be revealed." It's a profound thought that scattered across the globe. Throughout centuries of exile, war, and indoctrination, there would always be those who feel the pull of something older than time, something cosmic, something that can't be explained by evolution or accident. And perhaps they are not alone. Perhaps, in reading or hearing this story, a spark is kindled within us too. If there's one idea that persists beyond the fragmented remnants of Enki's tablets, it's that of hidden influence. The notion that the story didn't end when the Anunnaki vanished, or ascended, or retreated, but that it evolved, morphed, adapted, and most unsettling of all, that it continued to shape human history in ways we rarely notice and almost never question. It's here that speculation meets pattern. If we trace the fingerprints left by the Anunnaki, or more precisely, by their ancient influence, we begin to see eerie consistencies across the rise and fall of major civilizations. Every time humanity made a great leap, whether in agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, or governance, there's an oddly consistent mythological framework right behind it. A story of gods descending, a story of star beings, of knowledge from the sky, civilizers from the heavens. Take Sumer, of course, the cradle of written language and law where the Tablets of Enki originate. But then look eastward, to the Indus Valley, where the ancient texts of India speak of Vimanas, flying chariots and wars of the gods fought with skyborne weapons. Or westward, to the Andes, where Incan legends speak of Viracocha, a bearded, white-robed teacher from the stars, who brought architecture, farming, and calendars to the people. Or even further west, to Mesoamerica, where Quetzalcoatl, another bearded star god, promised to return one day. Different continents, different languages, yet the same theme repeats. Were these merely metaphors for natural cycles, or do they suggest a coordinated plan, a post-flood restoration led by survivors of an advanced race? Some scholars laugh off these parallels, but others dig deeper, and the more you compare creation myths, the more you realize they often share an oddly specific structure. The world was dark and wild. The gods came from the sky. They made mankind, taught him, and left. Enki's own tablets don't describe this as mythology. They describe it as logistics. They describe colonies, genetic programs, divisions of labor, rebellions, personal conflicts, tactical decisions. These are not the writings of a distant god, but of a scientist recording his fieldwork. So if Enki and the Anunnaki once walked among us, did they ever fully leave? Enki himself doesn't say so, not clearly, but he does mention an interim stewardship, a period where direct Anunnaki rule would end, but their systems, governments, priesthoods, symbols would remain in place. This was the transitional age. Power passed not to the people, but to hybrids, kings and high priests chosen for their proximity to divine, or rather Anunnaki, bloodlines. This pattern became the basis of divine monarchy across the ancient world. Egypt, for example, was ruled by pharaohs who claimed descent from the gods. Not metaphorically, but literally. Their right to rule came from being part divine. In Mesopotamia, kingship was said to be lowered from heaven, a clear reference to it being granted, not earned. In Mesoamerica, rulers performed blood rituals to communicate with the sky gods. Why? If the gods had left, who were they still talking to? It's possible then that what Enki foresaw in his final writings was the slow transformation of Anunnaki influence from physical to ideological. The beings themselves may have disappeared from direct view, but the structures they built continued. Temples became institutions, tablets became scripture, and Enki's carefully designed experiments, us, became both inheritors and prisoners of that legacy. But not all were content with the arrangement. In the hidden corners of the world, rebel traditions persisted. Mystery schools in Egypt, secret scrolls in Tibet, oral traditions among the Dogon in Africa, and esoteric texts scattered through Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Hermeticism. These teachings spoke not of servitude, but of awakening, of rediscovering one's inner divinity, of unlocking latent potential that mainstream society had long suppressed. Some of these traditions even named Enki, not as a villain, but as a liberator, a bringer of light, a Prometheus-like figure who defied his own kind to uplift humanity. In these tales, Enlil, his brother, is not the noble leader history painted him to be, but a jealous enforcer, a controller, perhaps even the archetype of what some today call archonic energy, systems that feed on control, fear, hierarchy. These are bold claims, but they echo through time. Enki, it seems, was never forgotten, only buried beneath reinterpretation. Some believe that the biblical serpent in Eden, traditionally viewed as Satan, is actually a distorted echo of Enki. After all, it was the serpent who encouraged humanity to eat from the tree of knowledge, not to sin, but to know, to awaken, to see. Could this be why Enki's name all but vanished from accepted religious history? Not because he was irrelevant, but because he was too important. Dangerously important. The forbidden history, then, may not be forbidden because it's false, but because it's powerful. Because if enough people knew that our very origin involved genetic manipulation, galactic migration, and ancient beings who may have walked among us, the entire framework of modern civilization would fracture. What is religion if the gods were scientists? What is science if evolution was nudged? What is history if our ancestors were not merely cave dwellers but star hybrids? These are the kinds of questions Enki wanted us to ask, not out of rebellion, but out of maturity, to reclaim what was lost, not as victims, but as participants. His final messages weren't just a chronicle of what had happened, but a challenge, a call to those who carry the spark, to dig deeper, to seek the truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because only by understanding where we came from can we decide where we're going. If we're to believe that Enki encoded knowledge into human culture, buried within myths, rituals, architecture, and symbols, then perhaps it's not the history books where we should look first, but the subconscious of humanity itself, the dreams we carry, the symbols we repeat, the archetypes that emerge generation after generation across all civilizations. These are not coincidences, they are echoes, traces. In Tablet 10, Enki made an unusual claim, one easily overlooked in a literal reading of the text. He suggested that language itself was engineered, not just given to humans as a tool for communication, but encoded with structures meant to activate memory. In other words, our very words might hold fragments of lost knowledge. Not only what we say, but how we say it, intonation, rhythm, sacred syllables, all may carry resonance from a time before memory. Consider the Sumerian word dingir, used to signify a god or deity. It also implies that which is bright or shining. Across Mesopotamian texts, the gods were described as luminous, radiant, cloaked in light. Later traditions mirrored this with phrases like shining ones, the brilliant ones, or those who fell from the sky like lightning. Even the Hebrew Elohim and the Greek Theos seem to trace back to root sounds related to light and authority. Is it possible that language was intentionally constructed to carry phonetic remnants of the past? Enki's tablet also mentioned frequency gates, a phrase that seems almost nonsensical until you step outside a modern materialist worldview. But to Enki, frequency was not metaphorical, it was functional. He described Earth as a layered system of resonances. Stone carried one kind, water another, human biology yet another. His creations, humanity, were built to respond to sound, to vibration. Specific frequencies could open or close access to memory, health, emotion. This sounds fantastic, but even modern science has begun to uncover hints of this. Cymatics, the study of sound wave patterns, shows how vibration organizes matter into coherent patterns. DNA responds to sound and light. The pineal gland, often called the third eye, contains light-sensitive tissue like that found in our physical eyes. Was it always meant to see more than light? Enki wrote of resonant triggers, objects, places, and even words that could reactivate dormant parts of the human system. Sacred sites like Stonehenge, Giza, and Teotihuacan were not chosen randomly. They were built on Earth's natural frequency nodes, places where the planet's own energy pulses with greater intensity. He implied that standing in these places while chanting certain sounds could lead to visionary experiences, memory downloads, awakening. Could it be that the monuments of the ancient world were not just markers of power, but tools, mechanisms designed to open perception? If so, Enki wasn't just a creator, he was an engineer of consciousness. Which brings us to the present. In Tablet 12, Enki made a grim prediction. He saw a time in the future when humans, having forgotten their origins, would begin to tamper again with genetics and frequency, blindly, without the wisdom that once guided the Anunnaki experiments. He foresaw a world of bioengineering, AI, and synthetic life, a world obsessed with information but devoid of understanding. He called it the Age of Reflection, when humanity would become a mirror of its creators, but without their discipline. He wrote that in this age, humanity's greatest danger would not be external invaders or divine wrath, it would be the forgetting, the loss of origin, the loss of soul, because when a species forgets where it came from, it begins to act without context, without reverence. It plays God without remembering what it cost the gods. And yet, he didn't write with despair. Even in this imagined future, Enki left a thread of hope. He believed that memory could return, not just historically, but genetically. That there would be those among humanity who, through dreams, intuitions, or inner knowing, would begin to remember. He called them the children of the spark, not bloodlines, but frequencies. Individuals who resonate with the original blueprint. Individuals who cannot be fully programmed, who ask forbidden questions, who seek forgotten truths. These individuals, he said, would be drawn to each other across time. They would not be defined by race or class or nationality, but by pattern recognition. They would hear the ancient signal still faintly pulsing beneath modern noise, and they would awaken others. Enki did not predict a sudden return of the Anunnaki, nor a dramatic world-ending event. What he described instead was a cycle, a spiral in which humanity would rise and fall until it chose, of its own free will, to evolve inwardly, to move from control to consciousness, from survival to sovereignty. And in that moment, the hidden teachings of the 14 tablets would cease to be forbidden. They would become recognized for what they always were, not warnings, but invitations, not threats, but keys. Because in the end, Enki's greatest gift was not technology or language or law, it was possibility. He gave us the capacity to grow beyond our design, to become not just the image of gods, but creators in our own right. That is the legacy encrypted in clay. That is the code beneath the ruins. That is the inheritance Enki left behind, not a history to memorize, but a choice to make. And that choice still stands before us. If Enki's message was encoded into the very foundations of human civilization, our myths, our symbols, our monuments, then the natural question becomes, why was it hidden? Why have these stories been suppressed, ridiculed, or rewritten for millennia? What power feared their disclosure so deeply that entire institutions were built to deny them? To understand that, we must follow the trail of suppression through time. From the moment humanity began rebuilding after the Deluge, Enlil's influence remained strong. While Enki sought to empower, Enlil sought to control. Civilization was to be orderly, hierarchical, predictable. Knowledge was to be given in pieces, not discovered independently. Writing systems were confined to priests. Astronomy was kept under lock. Mathematics served the temple, not the people. Over time, the original stories of the Anunnaki were sanitized. Enki became a trickster in some retellings, even demoted to a lesser deity. The flood story was absorbed into countless mythologies, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Book of Genesis, but always altered, shifted just enough to obscure the deeper truth. The gods became God. The shining beings became angels or demons. The technology became miracle. And the tablets, lost, buried, scattered. Those that survived were labeled myth. The ones that spoke plainly of genetic engineering, star maps, or advanced technology were quietly stored away in museum basements, inaccessible to public view. Some say the Vatican holds ancient texts that challenge biblical orthodoxy. Others speak of secret archives beneath London and Paris, vaults housing cuneiform fragments never translated, never shared. These are not just rumors. Over the decades, researchers and whistleblowers have hinted at classified Sumerian materials locked away by governments and religious authorities. And in the digital age, the suppression has only evolved. Algorithms now silence what inquisitions once did. Censorship wears the mask of fact-checking. Why? Because if Enki's full message were to be understood, it would dismantle the core narratives of power that dominate the modern world. If we are not the product of divine infallibility, but the result of a controversial experiment, half earthling, half Anunnaki, then what is religion? What is sin? What is salvation? If the gods were not all-knowing beings but conflicted scientists and rulers from another world, then what becomes of worship? What becomes of our obedience? And more dangerously, if humanity was made to be adaptable, capable of evolution beyond its initial design, then who dares to contain us? Who can justify control? This is the heart of the threat. Enki's tablets do not merely challenge religious history. They expose the artificial nature of control itself. They They suggest that our boundaries, biological, intellectual, spiritual, were always meant to be expanded, and that institutions which claim to define truth may in fact be the very forces keeping truth buried. Some of this suppression is conscious, deliberate, but much of it is unconscious, built into the very structure of our education, our language, our culture. Enki warned of this. He spoke of the forgetting, a passive amnesia that would settle over the species, not through trauma, but through distraction, noise, division, speed. He foresaw a world drowning in information but starving for meaning, where humans would measure atoms but ignore the soul, where they would look outward to the stars but forget the stars within. In this age, truth would not be censored through fire or force, but diluted, hidden in plain sight. Enki wrote that the greatest secrets are those never truly secret, only unrecognized. So we must ask, what are we failing to recognize? Look at the recurring symbols across ancient civilizations: serpents, trees, spirals, stars. Enki was often depicted with a serpent, an ancient emblem of knowledge, healing, and rebirth. Yet in many later traditions, the serpent becomes evil, a deceiver. Why the reversal? Was it symbolic character assassination, a deliberate distortion of Enki's role as bringer of awareness? Or take the Tree of Life, found in Sumerian, Egyptian, Hebrew, and Mayan texts, always central, always guarded. The tablets describe it not as a literal tree, but as a metaphor for genetic design, DNA branching across time. When Enki gifted humanity knowledge, it wasn't just fire or writing, it was access to their own divine code. In a world where everything is being edited, genes, data, memory, Enki's message matters more than ever because it reminds us that the true danger is not tampering with creation, but doing so without consciousness. We are now walking the same path the Anunnaki once did. We clone, we splice, we enhance, we build machines to replace thought, we terraform digital realities, but where is the wisdom? Where is the soul? Enki's tablets warned that a civilization without soul is a civilization that devours itself. And yet, he also believed in our potential. He saw humanity not as a failed experiment, but as an unfinished masterpiece. A species born of struggle, but capable of becoming creators themselves. He called us the third Genesis, not animal, not God, but something new. A hybrid being with the capacity to bridge matter and spirit, not just to serve creation, but to participate in it. That is the forbidden truth, that we are not broken, we are becoming. And maybe that's why the tablets were hidden, not to be lost forever, but to wait. To wait for a time when humanity would be ready to read them not as stories of ancient gods, but as messages from family, from ancestors, from those who made us and hoped we would go further. If we take Enki at his word, if the tablets are not myth but memory, then we must face an even greater possibility, that the Anunnaki are not merely part of our past, but of our future. In the final segments of the surviving text, Enki hints at cycles, not just historical cycles of rise and fall, but astronomical and spiritual rhythms that govern not only civilizations, but consciousness itself. He describes epochs where truth emerges, only to be buried again, and ages where humanity sleeps, only to awaken once more. According to Enki, we are not at the end of this cycle, we are at the threshold of another awakening. The return of Nibiru, the reactivation of ancient knowledge, and the reappearance of forgotten guardians are not separate events, but synchronized phenomena tied to cosmic timing. He writes of a time when humanity will begin to remember, not through instruction, but through resonance. When symbols long ignored will begin to stir something within us. When ancient dreams will feel too vivid, too specific to dismiss. When strange synchronicities will pull people toward ancient texts, toward the stars, toward the idea that we are not alone and never have been. And isn't that already happening? Look around. A surge in global interest in Sumerian myth, in the Anunnaki, in the notion that our origins are far stranger than we were taught. People across the world feel a kind of quiet urgency, an ache to remember something they can't quite name. Not nostalgia, but recognition. A sense that something ancient is surfacing, not from outside, but from within. Enki believed this was by design. He claimed that part of our genetic code was time-locked, information encrypted not in our brains, but in our very DNA. Codes that would only activate when the species had reached a certain point of evolution, not just technologically, but spiritually. And that moment, he wrote, would be catalyzed by crisis. A planetary tipping point. Sound familiar? Climate imbalance, mass surveillance, artificial intelligence, the rise of synthetic biology, the blurring of the real and the virtual. Enki foresaw a world not unlike our own, where humanity would either ascend to its next stage or collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. He never claimed to know which way we'd go. That, he said, was the great gamble of consciousness. But he left hints. He spoke of certain activation sites on Earth, places where the electromagnetic and geomagnetic fields intersected in ways that amplified awareness. Ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe, Giza, Machu Picchu, and the temples of southern Mesopotamia. He suggested that these locations were not chosen for their beauty or convenience, but because they sat on planetary nodes, Earth's energy circuits, much like acupuncture points on the human body. When humanity gathers at these sites, he wrote, the field around the species changes, the Earth remembers, and so do we. It is here that Enki's words take on a poetic, almost mystical tone. He speaks not just as a scientist or scribe, but as a witness to time. He tells us that our souls are not bound to this single lifetime, that the memory of what we were and what we did echoes across incarnations. That some among us today were once there, in Eridu, in Nippur, in Dilmun, watching the sky ships descend. He even hints that some among us were Anunnaki, not in blood but in spirit. He believed that over the millennia, some of the Anunnaki chose to reincarnate into human form, to observe, to guide, to assist from within. These were not gods in disguise, but ancient beings choosing to share in the human experience, to feel what we feel, to understand what it means to love, to fear, to forget, and to remember. That may sound impossible, but to Enki, the impossible was just the unmeasured. In his final writings, he emphasizes the role of inner transformation, that no technology, no celestial alignment, no external force could substitute for one essential task, the awakening of individual consciousness. He described the body as a vessel, the mind as a translator, and the soul as a living archive, a microcosm of all the knowledge the Anunnaki ever held, buried not in libraries or temples, but in the human heart. And he warned, the choice would always be ours. We could use knowledge to dominate or to liberate. We could seek power or purpose. We could repeat the mistakes of our creators or evolve beyond them. He did not know what we would choose, but he believed we would be tested, and perhaps are being tested now. What remains of the 14th tablet is haunting in its simplicity, a few scattered words and phrases that archaeologists struggle to place. Twins of light, the return of the mirror, the song of stone. These may sound like riddles, but perhaps they are keys, designed not to be solved, but felt. Because Enki knew the limits of language. He knew that words could carry only so much, that truth, real truth, would have to be lived. So maybe the tablets were never meant to be decoded like a puzzle, but awakened like a memory, not just studied, but embodied. And in that sense, maybe they've already done their job. After all, you're here, listening, wondering, feeling that pull inside you, that sense that there's more to your story than what you've been told. Maybe Enki's voice didn't vanish. Maybe it was simply waiting for the right time, the right mind, the right heart. And maybe that time is now. Maybe Enki's voice didn't vanish. Maybe it was simply waiting for the right time, the right mind, the right heart, and maybe that time is now. The awakening, from engineered species to conscious heirs, the 14 tablets of Enki, whether approached as literal history, profound allegory, or a potent synthesis of both, represent one of the most radical and transformative narratives ever to challenge the foundation of human identity. They do not merely suggest an alternative origin story. They dismantle the very pillars upon which our understanding of religion, history, and science has been built. To engage with these tablets is to embark on a journey that begins in the dust of ancient Sumer and ends in the deepest recesses of the human soul, forcing a fundamental reevaluation of who we are, why we are here, and what we have the potential to become. At its core, the Enki narrative presents a staggering demystification of the divine. The gods of old are recast not as omnipotent metaphysical spirits, but as flesh and blood beings, the Anunnaki, whose advanced technology and longevity rendered them indistinguishable from deities to our primitive ancestors. This is not a diminishment of their significance, but a recontextualization that bridges the chasm between myth and science. The Garden of Eden transforms from a metaphysical paradise into a genetic laboratory. The Great Flood shifts from an act of divine wrath to a calculated act of planetary sanitation. The Tower of Babel becomes a story of technological and linguistic control, not divine punishment for hubris. This framework does not strip these ancient stories of their power. Instead, it imbues them with a terrifying and compelling plausibility, suggesting that our most sacred myths are in fact the fragmented, distorted memories of real historical events. The most profound implication of this narrative is the redefinition of human nature itself. We are not the special creation of a solitary, benevolent God, nor are we merely the product of blind, materialistic evolution. According to Enki, we are a deliberate hybrid, a designed species, the product of a fusion between the indigenous life of Earth and the genetic essence of an extraterrestrial civilization. This third genesis places humanity in a unique and precarious position. We are the children of two worlds, carrying within us the primal instincts and biological heritage of this planet, combined with the cognitive spark and potential for technological mastery of our Anunnaki forebears. This inherent duality explains the central conflict of the human condition, our capacity for profound love and crippling fear, for breathtaking creativity and devastating destruction, for spiritual yearning and materialistic obsession. We are, in essence, a living contradiction, a species grappling with a divine inheritance we do not fully understand, housed in a mortal frame we cannot fully control. This origin story also provides a powerful lens through which to view the entire sweep of human history. The sudden, inexplicable rise of Sumerian civilization with its advanced astronomy, mathematics, law, and writing is no longer an archaeological mystery, but the logical outcome of directed knowledge transfer. The global similarities in myth and megalithic architecture are not evidence of psychic unity, but of a coordinated, post-diluvian rebuilding effort by a scattered yet connected advanced culture. The recurring archetypes of the wise, serpentine knowledge bringer and the stern authoritarian sky god are not Jungian fantasies, but echoes of the very real ideological schism between Enki and Enlil. History, from this perspective, is not a random walk, but a managed process, a long-term experiment with humanity as its primary subject. The enduring legacy of this experiment, as foretold by Enki, is the ongoing, invisible war for human consciousness. The struggle between the Enki faction, advocating for human awakening, sovereignty, and access to knowledge, and the Enlil faction, preferring control, hierarchy, and obedience, did not end with the departure of the Anunnaki. It was internalized, becoming the foundational conflict of human civilization. This war is fought not with plasma weapons, but with information and ideology. It manifests in religious dogmas that demand faith over inquiry, in political systems that thrive on division, in economic structures that foster dependency, and in educational models that discourage critical thought. The forgetting that Enki warned of is not a passive process, but an actively maintained condition, a societal trance designed to keep humanity from remembering its true power and potential. Yet, Enki's message is ultimately one of hope, not despair. His greatest gamble was not in creating us, but in encoding within us the capacity to transcend our programming. The spark he describes, the dormant genetic and spiritual potential within certain individuals, is the key to our liberation. This awakening is not about acquiring external knowledge, but about triggering an internal resonance, a remembering that occurs at the level of the soul. The global resurgence of interest in our ancient past, the intuitive pull towards sacred sites, the collective yearning for a deeper meaning beyond material consumption. These are not random trends. They are symptoms of a species-wide activation, the stirring of Enki's children of the spark, who are beginning to remember their heritage and their purpose. In the present age, standing at the precipice of our own technological renaissance, with genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and planetary management becoming realities, the warnings within the tablets have never been more relevant. We are now repeating the path of the Anunnaki, wielding godlike powers with the consciousness of apprentices. Enki's story serves as a crucial cautionary tale. Technology without wisdom, power without compassion, and knowledge without soul lead inevitably to ruin. The choice before us is the same one that faced our creators. Will we use our growing capabilities to dominate and control, cementing the Enlil paradigm? Or will we choose the path of Enki, using our gifts to uplift, to heal, and to consciously evolve, finally stepping into our role as responsible stewards of our world and our own destiny? Therefore, the true conclusion of the 14 Tablets of Enki is not a historical fact to be verified, but a choice to be made. The tablets are a mirror, forcing us to confront our own nature and our future. They tell us that we are not abandoned orphans in a meaningless universe, nor are we powerless subjects of divine whim. We are the heirs to a cosmic legacy, the products of a bold and controversial experiment in consciousness. Our origin may lie in a laboratory, but our destiny lies in our own hands. The voice of Enki, whispering across the millennia, does not call us to worship him. It calls us to awaken, to remember, and to become the conscious, sovereign beings we were always meant to be. The experiment is over. The era of self-aware evolution has begun. The echo in the dust. The story of the 14 Tablets of Enki does not end where the clay fragments break. It ends where we stand now. Across 5,000 years, fragments of a forbidden history have whispered through the cracks of accepted timelines. They've surfaced as myths of gods and heroes, encoded symbols, inexplicable monuments, bloodlines, and dreams. We've named them myth, then archetype, then coincidence. But what if they were always memory? What if the tablets were never meant to simply inform, but to awaken? The tablets tell of a scientist who became a god in the eyes of his creations, of a species born not in a garden, but in a laboratory, of a plan that began with gold and ended with consciousness. They tell of rebellion, compassion, and of a rift between two brothers, one who sought control and one who sought freedom. And they end, not with a triumph, but with a warning. The seed of the future lies buried in the past. The echo of that warning reaches us now, in an age Enki seemed to anticipate. We stand at the precipice of a world he described in his final tablets, a world awash in knowledge but starved for wisdom, a world rewriting its own biology, without remembering why it was once rewritten for us. We are repeating the story, step for step, but this time, we are the architects. It is tempting to see the Anunnaki as villains or saviors, but perhaps that's the wrong frame. Perhaps they were simply what we are now becoming, beings of great power and greater blindness, playing with the fabric of life. Enki's regret was not creating humanity, but underestimating how creation changes the creator. He foresaw a time when his experiment would surpass its parameters, not in technology, but in spirit. A time when the children of balance would awaken. He wrote that when this time came, no temple, no priesthood, no government would hand over the truth. It would arise not from stone tablets, but from within, the soul codes embedded in human consciousness itself. The story would resurface in symbols, synchronicities, and forgotten texts. People would begin to feel before they knew. They would gather before they understood why. They would question, and in the questioning, remember. Maybe that is what is happening now. Maybe that's why you're reading this. The epilogue of the 14 Tablets of Enki is not an ending at all. It is a handoff. The clay breaks off mid-sentence because the next chapter isn't written on stone. It's written in us. We are the living continuation of the experiment. We are the clay tablets now. Will we repeat the cycle of our makers, knowledge without soul, power without wisdom? Or will we do what Enki could only hope for, become more than the sum of our origins? The answer lies not in archives or secret vaults, but in a choice that's being made, quietly, by millions of individuals right now. A choice between remembering and forgetting, between sleep and awakening, between repeating the mistakes of gods and stepping into the role of conscious creators. Somewhere, buried under the sands of Eridu, Nippur, or beneath a temple no one has yet uncovered, a fragment of Tablet 14 still waits, but perhaps it's only waiting to remind us of what we already carry, a code, a spark, a memory older than history. Enki's voice fades on clay, but it may live on in us, not as a myth, but as an echo, a resonance, a call. And if you feel that call, if this story stirs something nameless but familiar, then perhaps you are already part of the epilogue. Perhaps the epilogue isn't something you read at the end of a book, but something you live at the beginning of a new chapter. The tablets end, but the signal continues. It's in the stars, it's in the stones, it's in you. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Check out more videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.